Hey everyone, it's Nova here. After we talked about World War I in the last episode, this episode is gonna be fire. World War II, the biggest, baddest conflict in history, so far, with over 60 million lives lost and its ripple effects still felt today. I'll be presenting this historical epic alongside my pal, Nova, right here on your channel, Nova Briefcase.
Before we begin, I just want to say that in light of current global developments, it seems we're rapidly heading towards an inevitable day, and a new chapter in human history will be written, the one we've all been dreading, World War III.
And if we survive, you bet we'll make a video about it. That would be legendary.
Anything epic comes in a trilogy. The Lord of the Rings trilogy, the Godfather trilogy, and the Hangover trilogy.
But this World War II episode will be a bit different from our World War I, because we're going to focus more on the most iconic figure of that war. That's right, folks, the mustache guy himself.
Germany, in the aftermath of World War I, was slapped with heavy economic sanctions. Its map redrawn with territories snatched away, its army disbanded, and restricted from ever rebuilding a force exceeding 100,000 troops, or arming itself in any way that could pose a threat to other nations. For instance, they weren't allowed to have an air force. All these measures made Hitler feel unjustly treated, and he was determined to change the status quo.
We, the Mannschaft, defeated Brazil in Brazil. The land stripped from Germany must be reclaimed. The army must be rearmed, and Germany must rise to become a superpower so that Aryan supremacy can rule.
The big question is, how would he achieve this when all of Europe was against the resurgence of Germany? Hitler had two public faces. To the international community, he portrayed himself as a peace-loving guy. I mean, what do you expect from a cute, art-loving guy with a Charlie Chaplin mustache? Peace, love, and comedy, right? I personally was convinced. He only wanted to lift the injustice off Germany through peaceful diplomatic means and reclaim its lost territories, not through violence like Germany's approach in World War I. But his domestic rhetoric, my dear subscriber, was quite different. He was stoking the flames of nationalism, rallying the people with slogans like, 999, we won't accept this anymore. Meanwhile, on the ground, he was secretly rearming Germany and building up its military as quickly as possible. Actually, the rearmament of Germany started even before Hitler came to power. It was initiated by some officers in the German military. You see, the Germans were feeling pretty bitter, angry, and resentful after World War I. There was a strong desire for revenge against the victorious nations. There was even a saying going around, "We'll be back in 20 years." For example, in 1920, General Hans von Zicht was one of the key figures in rebuilding the German military, even though he was only allowed to have 100,000 troops. To overcome the numerical limitations, he decided to train these soldiers as officers. That way, when the opportunity arose to increase the size of the army, these officers would be ready to train new recruits.
That's a genius plan.
Not only that, the German army wasn't allowed to have tanks, so they brought in tanks and called them tractors.
We're peace-loving vegetarians, not warmongers.
They also engaged in deception by forming groups to study the design of warplanes under the guise of civilian aircraft development. They were just waiting for the right moment to put these designs into action and strengthen their air force. But this opportunity was hard to come by, dear subscriber, as long as Germany was bound by the Treaty of Versailles, which they were forced to sign at the end of World War I.
You have to stick to the rules, dear.
Hitler endured this treaty until he secured the support of the army leaders, after eliminating most of his rivals, notably his former friend, Ernst Röhm. And so, in 1935, Hitler ended this treaty.
Oh my gosh, he actually did it. He's challenging the world. This Charlie Chaplin really wants to play, huh?
And immediately after withdrawing from the Treaty of Versailles, he passed the Armed Forces Reorganization Law and announced the creation of the terrifying Air Force, the Luftwaffe. He reinstated compulsory military service starting at age 20. Even children and teenagers weren't spared. They were enrolled in the Hitler Youth, an organization that included weapons training as part of its program. All this led to a massive increase in the size of the army. By 1937, the army had grown to 5 million soldiers.
Whoa, I thought we were talking about 100,000. How did it jump to 5 million?
Let me tell you, my friend, those 5 million are just the active duty personnel. There were also 8 million in reserve. Over time, Hitler's confidence grew, and he became impatient for the opportunity to bare his teeth. This opportunity came in 1936 when France was preparing to sign a peace treaty with Russia. Hitler, simply because he hated Russia, claimed this was a violation of the Locarno Treaties, which were signed in 1925 and guaranteed non-aggression between France, Germany, and Belgium. So, he ordered the remilitarization of the Rhineland, a region that Germany had been forced to demilitarize after World War I, as it is a border strip that connected Germany to the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Belgium, and France. The German military commanders were against entering this region, fearing it would provoke France. The army at that time was still unprepared, and the rearmament process was far from complete. They were in no position to confront France, but Hitler insisted on sending the army to the French border, arguing that any diplomatic move without military backing would be seen as a sign of weakness. Not only that, Hitler was convinced that France wouldn't retaliate militarily and would simply let it happen. For two reasons, dear subscriber. First, France hadn't fully recovered from World War I and wasn't prepared for another war. Second, Hitler had a good relationship with the British king, Edward VIII, who sympathized with Germany and believed it had been unfairly treated by the Treaty of Versailles. He understood Hitler's demands and assured him that the British people wouldn't accept a war over something as trivial as remilitarizing a demilitarized zone.
Someone might ask, what's up with the King of the United Kingdom? Isn't the United Kingdom governed by a government? The answer is that, according to British tradition, it's not appropriate for the government to declare war if the king doesn't agree.
And so, on Saturday, March 7th, Hitler gave the order to commence what was called the Winter Exercise. 20,000 Wehrmacht soldiers marched and took positions in the Rhineland, taking advantage of the fact that it was a weekend, so that by the time the news reaches the French government, their reaction will be delayed until Monday.
Saturday is a day off, a time for breakfast with baguette, jam, and butter. Not a time for wars. Come back on Monday.
We often hear about wars starting on weekends. It's a simple and optimistic strategy, incredibly naive, but it worked, dear subscriber. France and Britain didn't respond, just as that madman Hitler had anticipated. This avoidance of war due to exhaustion only boosted Hitler's confidence that he could repeat the process. But this time, beyond Germany's borders.
Oh no.
In his book, Mein Kampf, published in 1923, Hitler said, "One blood demands one Reich. Austria must return to the motherland." Hitler believed in uniting all Germans scattered across Europe under one banner. And the largest number of Germans outside of Germany were where?
In Austria, which, by the way, is Hitler's birthplace where he spent his childhood and youth. In fact, the majority of Austrians supported the idea of unification with Germany, which was called the Anschluss, in 1938.
The first attempt at merger was in 1934, when the Austrian Nazi Party staged a coup. The attempt failed, but they did succeed in assassinating the Austrian Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss. This pushed the Austrian government to work hard to prevent unification with this aggressive man. But Hitler didn't give up. He set his sights on making his first military move outside Germany, the unification with Austria. To do this, he needed to ensure that no country sharing a border with Austria would act against him. He wanted to stay on the safe side. At that time, there was no greater threat than fascist Italy, led by Mussolini. Mussolini shared Hitler's hatred for communists, but was against Hitler's persecution of the Jews. When the Austrian Chancellor was assassinated, Mussolini said, "Hitler is the guilty man and a dangerous fool." He added, meaning that if the Nazis ruled Europe, they would drag everyone into the abyss. This was even before the Holocaust. He couldn't stand him. But we'll see.
Spoiler alert, they become good fellas, then wreak havoc, lose the war, and both die.
Shut up, Meg. Everyone knows that. Italy was internationally isolated and needed allies. And after its invasion of Abyssinia in 1935, Il Duce Mussolini sent his son-in-law Galeazzo Ciano, who was also his foreign minister, to Berlin to negotiate with Hitler and gain his favor.
Wait a minute, isn't this the same guilty man and a dangerous fool? Don't be too hard on the guy. I'm a dictator, he's a dictator, we're basically co-workers.
And indeed, a secret agreement was signed in which Italy agreed to Germany's invasion of Austria on the condition that it not violate Italy's borders.
Go ahead, buddy. Invade Austria. Make yourself at home. Just don't come into our space. We might be taking a shower or something.
This agreement expanded in 1937 when Hitler promised Mussolini he would support him and let him do whatever he wanted in the Mediterranean.
Take it and play with it as you wish.
In exchange, Hitler could do as he pleased in Europe, north of the Alps.
Deal, my colleague?
And so, Austria was sold out. All that was needed now was a convincing excuse for the international community. In 1938, Hitler hosted the Austrian Chancellor in Berlin and threatened that if Austria didn't meet all his demands immediately, he would invade militarily. By the end of the day, the Nazi prisoners in Austria, who had been arrested in 1934, were released.
Yeah, remember? After that failed coup attempt?
The unification of currency between Germany and Austria was announced. But that wasn't all. The Austrian Chancellor was forced to appoint Nazi ministers to his government, the most dangerous being the Interior Minister, Arthur Seyss-Inquart.
Imagine, dear subscriber, having an interior minister loyal to another country.
Following this economic union, currency unification and so on, there were staged demonstrations and riots in Austria, organized by the Nazis. So, the Nazi Interior Minister asked Hitler to send the German army under the pretext of helping to restore security and order. Hitler told him, "Of course, my homie, I'm here for you. Boys, army, go see what's going on there. I love peace and safety." On Saturday of that week, the German army began invading Austria.
Again, on a weekend when the whole world won't be in their offices.
And the next day, Sunday, the Austrian army surrendered without any resistance.
An invasion so smooth. We're not going to invade. We're going for a picnic.
To legitimize the invasion, Hitler organized a referendum on the Union in both Germany and Austria.
Gotta make it look legal. He loves to appear legal.
And the result was a surprise. Well, the outcome was expected and known even before the vote, but the results themselves were surprising. In Austria, 99.7% of Austrians approved the Union, which was even higher than the German approval rate of 99.1%. An overwhelming majority, and the difference is not big. And this further increased Hitler's confidence and popularity among the Germans, who were delighted with this expansion.
All right, why not repeat this again since the international community remained silent? What a polite international community!
The second experiment was in the second largest concentration of Germans outside of Germany, Czechoslovakia. In 1938, Hitler began protesting the miserable conditions of the Germans there. And of course, you already know what he's hinting at and intends to do.
Imagine Hitler complaining about human rights violations.
And he began to threaten, and for the first time publicly, that if the situation of the Germans there did not improve, he would be forced to invade the areas where they lived.
Excuse me, dude, but human rights are a red line for me.
And here, finally, the world began to worry about this. At a time when the world was barely recovering from the consequences of the war and trying to avoid a new one, there was someone openly threatening that if his demands were not met, he would wage war. On September 29, 1938, Mussolini played the role of a peace dove.
Ha! Imagine Mussolini as a dove.
He called for a meeting in Munich between him, Hitler, the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, and the French Prime Minister Édouard Daladier, in an attempt to avoid war and resolve the crisis.
All this without inviting any official from Czechoslovakia, which is the one concerned. Not even Russia, assuming it had power, but this is understandable since the four of them dislike the communists.
During the meeting, Hitler remained firm in his stance.
We want peace, not war, but for the dignity of the Germans there and for human rights, we will be forced to go to war.
And apparently, France and Britain bought into this, or to avoid war, agreed to give him the areas where Germans lived in Czechoslovakia, hoping that everyone would be relieved. This is called appeasement. As soon as the meeting ended and Czechoslovakia heard that it had been sold, it handed over those regions without any resistance.
Just take it.
And so, Hitler became the most powerful man in Europe, to the extent that Time magazine named him Person of the Year for 1938, praising his ability to impose his political and military will on Europe's leaders.
The man shows no fear, so let's put his picture on Time's cover.
He conquered 2 countries without spilling a drop of blood, and made agreements with Italy, Britain, and France. Of course, invading the German regions in Czechoslovakia was just putting one foot in the door, with the other foot leading to the occupation of the entire country.
Germans love stretching their legs. They are quite tall.
And just as he did with the Austrian leader, Hitler invited the Czechoslovakian leader, Emil Hácha, to a meeting in Germany on March 13, 1939.
Come to me, darling.
When he arrived, Hitler terrified and threatened him with military invasion and bombing of Prague by German planes if he didn't sign the surrender memorandum. And of course, he signed it. And the next day, the German army began entering Czechoslovakia. And so, there was no European country with a German minority left except Poland.
What is this, seriously? What kind of madness is this?
Poland, my dear subscriber, not only had German citizens but was also the gateway if you wanted to conquer the head and stronghold of communism in the world.
Russia, or what was known as the Soviet Union, Austria, and Czechoslovakia were just a piece of cake, cupcake, small things like that. But Hitler knew that entering Poland wouldn't be easy. There will be blood, there will be strong resistance, and most likely, France and Britain will fight him. Are you sure, Hitler, about what you're planning to do? We'll see what Hitler will do.
He believed that any French move towards Western Germany would take about 3 weeks. During that time, he would have successfully finished the invasion of Poland, allowing him to negotiate with France and sign a peace treaty by confronting them with a fait accompli.
Hey, what are you doing? There's no point in the war. Poland is already fallen.
As for Britain, which doesn't share any land borders with Germany, he thought it would follow the same approach as France and wouldn't get involved in the family affairs happening in Central Europe. This means that Hitler bet on the element of time.
We have to enter Poland and finish the job in less than 3 weeks.
The invasion strategy, Fall Weiss, relied on plans that forever changed the nature of military engagement. Instead of a long, drawn-out war like World War I, with trench warfare where each army was entrenched in their lines, firing from a distance and waiting for the other side to advance, Hitler relied on the tactic of blitzkrieg, which means lightning war in German. This tactic, planned by Officer Heinz Guderian, depended on speed, surprising the enemy, and concentrating attacks on a single point through a coordinated attack by tanks and motorcycles, which would open a gap in the enemy lines through which infantry and artillery could enter and encircle the enemy from behind and eliminate them, with the support of air forces providing air cover and bombing defensive fortifications that hinder ground forces.
The plan is ready, and the army is ready, and morale is all the way up.
But there was still one obstacle: Russia. Hitler had to ensure that Russia wouldn't take sides, because if Russia intervened to help Poland, the invasion would take longer. This would encourage France and Britain to enter the war, and they wouldn't sign our planned peace treaty. Thus, Germany's nightmare from World War I would repeat itself, and for this reason, Hitler tasked his foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, to negotiate with his Soviet counterpart, Vyacheslav Molotov. And indeed, on August 23, 1939, a 10-year non-aggression pact was signed between the two countries. Not only that, but a secret clause was included in the treaty, ensuring that Joseph Stalin would not intervene in the German invasion of Poland.
Ah, a little diplomatic dance with the Soviets, huh?
In return, Joseph Stalin would get to invade Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania.
What's up with these guys? They're like a gang, and all of them have mustaches. Heh.
Additionally, on top of those 3 countries, some regions in eastern Poland.
Sorry, broski, but I need them. You support me in my invasion, I support you in yours. Dictatorship solidarity.
And of course, Hitler always needed a pretext for any invasion. Poor Poland had no idea what was being plotted around it. This casus belli was devised by Reinhard Heydrich, the deputy of Heinrich Himmler, the leader of the SS, a security organization of the Nazi Party. On August 31st, in the dead of night and into the early morning of September the 1st, Reinhard Heydrich and his men, disguised in Polish military uniforms, rounded up a group of political prisoners and dressed them in Polish military uniforms. They then attacked a radio station, customs posts, and German guard posts on the border with Poland.
Oh my gosh, they're shooting at us. Wink, wink.
Then his men killed the poor prisoners wearing Polish uniforms, so that there would be evidence that the Polish army had indeed attacked the German checkpoints. Later that day, Hitler entered Parliament and condemned the Polish terrorist attack and used the incident as an excuse, and the invasion began. And then, on September 3, 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany, and World War II officially began. Poland collapses in front of the German forces within a month.
It was planned to be over in 3 weeks.
Hitler annexed the western part of Poland to Germany, while Russia took the eastern part under the pretext of protecting Russian minorities.
They all just love minorities.
And in central Poland, Hitler appointed a German governor, Hans Frank. After the success of the invasion, the extremely fierce SS troops, who were meticulously selected and fiercely loyal to Hitler, entered Poland. As soon as they entered, they arrested anyone who owned a telephone in their home, as well as prominent businessmen, religious figures, and politicians. They executed hundreds of thousands, many of whom were Jews, over the course of the war. That really bugged some army commanders, who were against the field execution of civilians. But the SS didn't care. All that mattered to them was keeping their mustached boss satisfied. Hitler was thrilled with the success of the Blitzkrieg tactic, and so he wanted to eliminate the threat from France and England to focus on his main goal, Russia.
Oh, didn't he just sign a 10-year peace treaty with them?
Hitler hated two things, Jews and communists. And where were they located?
In Russia, the Soviet Union.
Which he saw as a country full of Jews and communists. And to ensure he reached his goal, he had to secure his resources and maintain the supply lines coming from Northern Europe. In April 1940, he occupied Norway and Denmark. And in May, he began occupying France, taking Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg along the way.
He's like a non-stop train. Isn't this the Germany that lost the war and was humiliated with sanctions? How did it manage to occupy all these countries? Chill out a little, boy. He seems like a tourist who got a Schengen visa and decided to take a Euro trip. Hitler should have been a travel vlogger.
And with that, only Britain remained, and he thought it would lean towards peace, especially after witnessing what happened to France. This was Hitler's first strategic mistake, because he didn't take into account a very important person in the equation, Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of England, who believed that the threat posed by Hitler would not end except by defeating him militarily and eliminating him. After most of Europe fell under Hitler's control, Britain remained alone, facing the mightiest army in Europe, perhaps even the world. Yet, Winston Churchill never considered peace, knowing full well that any option other than war would only benefit Hitler. He believed that someone had to stop him immediately. Hitler tried to reach a diplomatic solution with Britain, but was met with Churchill's constant refusal. Then Hitler said, "Screw it. We don't need that. To hell with them," and ordered the Air Force to bomb Britain and destroy its Air Force. But he failed miserably, as the British Air Force was stronger than he expected. He then attempted to plan a ground invasion of Britain, named Operation Sea Lion. But the operation was never completed due to a shortage of ships capable of transporting troops and equipment, as well as a lack of the necessary naval means to support and secure this transport and landing. And the British Royal Navy was known for its strength. Here, Hitler considered a strategic shift that was a pivotal point that changed the course of the entire war. Instead of trying to defeat Britain to face Russia comfortably in the final, he decided to fight Russia first, because victory over it would leave Britain with no other option but to seek peace, as it would be there, utterly alone.
Of course, you might ask us, where's Spain in all this? Spain just came out of a civil war. Thank you for the insightful question.
Many officers opposed this idea, believing it would lead them to ruin and would be entirely unnecessary, since you had just signed a 10-year peace treaty. During those 10 years, you would have all the time in the world to defeat Britain and then turn your attention to Russia. Plus, no sane dictator would ever invade Russian territory. Haven't you learned from history and what happened to Napoleon Bonaparte? And what's the point of fighting on two fronts at the same time instead of just one? Why? Why? But no one could persuade him otherwise. Stubborn as ever, Hitler was determined in his decision, and disobeying orders meant prison or execution, or, if he was in a good mood, just a discharge. And the plan to invade Russia was called Operation Barbarossa, named after Frederick Barbarossa, the German hero who conquered vast lands east of Germany in the 12th century.
Such a dumb move, Hitler. What's with the obvious name? Even a less bright student in elementary school could tell from the operation's name that you're heading east to invade Russia.
Although the plan was actually called Plan Otto. Now, some might ask how he intended to invade Russia in this cold and avoid Napoleon's fate. Hitler knew that facing Russia in winter meant certain defeat, which is why the plan aimed to defeat the Soviets in 5 or 6 months at most.
So they waited until the end of the current winter, planning to start the invasion in the upcoming May and finish it by October before the snow started falling.
And he was so confident that he wouldn't need more time than that he distributed winter clothes to only 20% of the army. And let me tell you, dear subscriber, according to my military experience, that's a very high level of optimism. But then, the surprise. On October 28, 1940, Mussolini decided on his own to invade Greece.
Damn you, Mussolini. What are you doing to me? Are you still dreaming of reviving the Roman Empire? Greece wasn't bothering Hitler at all.
Greece received support from British forces, so Hitler found himself forced to send troops to assist Italy because if Britain defeated the Italians in Greece, it would attack Germany from the south, creating a new front due to Mussolini's stupidity. And for the German forces to reach Greece, they had to pass through Yugoslavia, which was not hostile to the Germans but remained neutral.
It doesn't concern me.
But unfortunately, a military coup happened in Yugoslavia.
Damn you, Mussolini.
And the coup leaders refused to cooperate with Hitler, so he decided to invade Yugoslavia. All this just to get to Greece in time and help Mussolini before it's too late.
I occupied all of Europe by myself, and you couldn't finish off Greece on your own? I'm dealing with an amateur dictator. The Japanese are better than you.
Then the battles extended to the colonies in North Africa, forcing Hitler to send Erwin Rommel, nicknamed the Desert Fox, to assist Italy there. Despite initial victories, he was defeated in the Battle of El Alamein. Anyway, all these events delayed the invasion of Russia by a month from the planned date.
Imagine, sometimes making a single YouTube video takes several months, while occupying countries is only delayed by a month. That's the Germans, folks.
So he only had about 4 months left to complete the invasion of the Soviets because the deadline was October, before the start of the harsh, long, cold season. And on June 22, 1941, the German invasion of Russia began with over 3.5 million troops. Stalin was unaware and didn't understand that Hitler was attacking him, thinking it was just British propaganda.
My fellow dictator, didn't we sign a non-aggression pact for 10 years? Aren't you fighting Britain? Aren't we mustached comrades?
Stalin was in a tough position because, in the previous period, he had gotten rid of all the experienced military leaders he suspected were a threat to him. The army's weapons were outdated compared to the more advanced, well-trained and disciplined German army. However, the vast expanses of land and the large number of Soviet soldiers allowed the Russian army to withstand the German army, which failed to achieve victory within 4 months. This slow progress continued until the summer of 1942.
What happened?
The Battle of Stalingrad. This city was of strategic importance to Hitler because it was the main Russian military manufacturing center and also because it bore Stalin's name. Its capture by the Germans would be a significant blow. We can say that the Führer, Adolf Hitler, took it personally. The German forces attacked the city with all their might, but failed to achieve any decisive gains before winter. During the winter, the Russians managed to launch a massive counterattack, successfully encircling the German Sixth Army, which consisted of over 300,000 soldiers. The German officers, faced with this situation, began planning a tactical withdrawal to save the army, but Hitler refused.
I say stay there. No retreat under any circumstances.
To the point that when they informed him that his sister's son Leo was injured in the battle and needed a light aircraft for evacuation, he refused and said, "My nephew Leo is a soldier. He gets treated like the soldiers there, or dies like them." And that was a message that the army's job there was to win or die, no backing down for any reason. The result, dear subscriber, was the loss of the German Sixth Army, which surrendered after the deaths of thousands of its members and the capture of more than 90,000 others. And this was Hitler's first major loss. So the problem wasn't just with Mussolini. Hitler himself hadn't learned from history. Meanwhile, Japan, an ally of Germany and Italy in what was known as the Axis powers, was invading China and committing atrocities there, but China began receiving support from the United States. And then Japan attacked the American base at Pearl Harbor, which resulted in the United States officially entering World War II the day after the incident, on December 8, 1941.
America's entry into the field was like LeBron James stepping onto the court, making a huge difference in favor of the Allies. By 1943, the Allies managed to overcome the German U-boats in the Atlantic Ocean, which were very famous for their strength, and they also achieved victory in North Africa. It seems, dear subscriber, that this is the beginning of the end.
The Allies were able to carry out a landing on the beaches of Normandy to liberate France, while the Soviets managed to reclaim their territories and advance towards Berlin. And the weaker Hitler became, the more neutral countries, and even his allies, betrayed him and declared war on him. In Italy, the fascist party managed to remove Mussolini from power with the approval of King Victor Emmanuel III. Mussolini was later assassinated by communists and was hung upside down in the street with his mistress in a gruesome spectacle. Italy exited the war, and Hitler lost his most important ally in Europe. The specter of defeat became a reality unfolding in front of us. The military commanders tried to convince Hitler to surrender before Germany was destroyed, but he was in complete denial. He still hoped to change the course of the war, believing that the fault lay with the treacherous and weak army leaders who couldn't execute his plans. This detachment from reality led to several assassination attempts by German army officers who were convinced that he needed to be removed to save Germany. As a result, he lost trust in everyone around him, even his closest associates. In January 1945, Hitler went down into a bunker to protect himself from the bombings.
They have entered Berlin.
He stayed there in the bunker with his lover, Eva Braun, whom he married in his final days, awaiting his inevitable end. And with the Allies and the Red Army reaching the gates of Berlin by the end of April 1945, the story ends. Hitler and his wife commit suicide by swallowing poison pills and then shooting themselves, or so the official story goes, as there are still discrepancies about the details. Thus ended the dream of a greater Germany, which was divided into East Germany under Russian control and West Germany under the Allies. And a new empire emerged to lead the world, the United States of America, which exacted brutal revenge on Japan with 2 atomic bombs, ending the war and declaring that the future belonged to the Americans, not the Germans. This proclamation was followed by the beginning of the Cold War.
There are many details we didn't cover in this episode, but there are numerous lessons to be learned from it. One of the most important is that if you ever become a dictator and have a military ambition that you learned while playing Fortnite, beware of the weekend. Someone might invade you. See ya in the next one.